Our opening words are an excerpt from a post by Rhiannon Barabel. Dismantling the perfectionism of environmentalism. The evidence is there to highlight the climate crisis we are facing. We are constantly told we need to make changes if we are to tackle this, yet we live in a world where it is near impossible to be a perfect environmentalist. Our society is riddled with comparison to family members, friends, celebrities, and strangers, driven by our addiction to social media, which often leaves us feeling somewhat inadequate in our sustainability efforts in comparison to the eco-influencers we see online. The problem is we spend too much of our time worrying about what others are doing and what isn't sustainable in our lives, but forget about what is. It is too easy to discredit ourselves for the things we're not doing, but too hard to praise ourselves for all the good we already do every day. Despite what it may seem on social media, no one is the perfect environmentalist. The indefinite list of global problems can be overwhelming, and knowing where to start on your sustainability journey can be daunting. As an environmentalist myself, or an eco-warrior as my parents call me, I feel a certain level of responsibility to live the most sustainable lifestyle possible. However, this idealistic lifestyle is unrealistic and inaccessible to many, including myself, due to factors out of our control. Growing up in a small village in the southwest of the UK meant that public transport was never an option for me. My nearest train station was a 15-minute drive away, and with an irregular and sparse bus service, car was my only option. As soon as I turned 17, I started driving and got my own car. In fact, pretty much everyone I knew did. Sorry, I seem to have lost a page. Of course, this was far from sustainable, but it was our only choice other than walking. I still get the comments now. You care about the environment, but you drive a car, intending to disregard my sustainability efforts by picking out the things I can't change yet due to circumstances and accessibility. These comments can be belittling and leave a feeling of guilt because you're not doing enough. Wrong. In fact, you are doing more than enough. Every little change helps. Environmentalism is a journey, and everyone is at a different stage. Focus on yourself, recognize your achievements for your efforts, and stop comparing yourself to others. Our actions, combined with millions of others, will make a difference. There is a misconception that you can become sustainable overnight, but this is not true. Everyone has to start somewhere and overcome personal barriers that often restrict our accessibility to sustainability. My advice for starting your sustainability journey and conquering the overwhelming feeling of hopelessness and helplessness is to make a list and start small. Do things that are achievable and accessible to you, whether that's buying loose fruit and veg at the supermarket, reducing meat consumption, walking more, or switching to reusable products. You will have started, and that is the most important thing. Once you make one change, you want to make more. But don't feel disheartened or guilty for not being the perfect environmentalist. No one is perfect, and that is okay. As long as you are trying, you're already making progress. It's better to be imperfectly eco than not eco at all.
This morning is also the first Sunday of Advent, which in the Christian tradition is the practice of honoring and waiting for the birth of Jesus for the 4 Sundays prior to Christmas. And we, as inheritors of that tradition, have kept this particular practice going in our congregation, along with the practice of having the Holy Family back there on the ridge by the clock make their way around and to the front of the sanctuary by our Christmas Eve service. You may note that this year's Holy Family has 2 Marys, mixing it up, keeping it lively. And Each candle in the Advent wreath has a particular theme. The first candle's theme is hope, which is also the theme of our worship and small group ministry for December here at First Parish. And as the days get shorter and the nights get longer and the weather gets colder, we may need to light and relight our candles. And as things may feel more like doom and gloom, more like despair and fear in our hearts, we can also practice lighting and relighting the candle of hope in our hearts so that we may offer it to others when they need a little bit of light. I invite you to join in our opening hymn, a crowd pleaser we haven't done in a moment. It's Blue Boat Home in your teal hymnals, number 1064. Good morning and welcome to First Parish in Bedford, a Unitarian Universalist congregation where we gather together to bring more love, more generosity, more justice into this world. We welcome all those who might be visiting this morning and all those who are attending on Zoom. And if you are here in person and newer to this community, you're invited to fill out a blue welcome card And if you're on Zoom, you can fill out the link in the chat to become more connected to this congregation and to the many things we have going on. Children are always welcome in our worship services, and there are also children's programs that will begin in a little bit after our story, and a nursery that is available for the tiniest ones. And we do have quite a few things going on in this community, as always. You can check out the announcements in your order of worship for several upcoming events, including an upcoming concert later this month. I just want to name one thing that is coming up next Sunday, which is that the Adult Faith Development subgroup of the Faith Development Committee is hosting a forum on love at the center, looking at the new arrangement of the values that was passed over the summer by the UUA General Assembly, the revision to the UUA bylaws that gives us a differently worded set of values that puts love at the center. And we'll be looking at how we apply that to our lives. That will be after worship next week on the 8th up in the Bacon Room. So you're invited to join us for that. And with that, I invite you to rise in body or in spirit and join us in our unison affirmation printed in your order of worship. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio es su ley. Este es nuestro gran pacto, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en espíritu de amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros.
Good morning. A song for rain clouds. Once upon a time, in a small village nestled between rolling hills and sparkling rivers, there lived a little bird named Elena. The bird was small, with soft brown feathers and a song that could melt the coldest of hearts. But Elena had a secret. She was afraid of storms. Every time the sky turned gray and the wind began to howl, Elena would fly quickly to the safety of her nest, huddling close to the birds who shared her home in the great oak tree. While the other birds would sing, sometimes even in the strongest winds, Elena remained silent. She couldn't help but worry if she sang, the storm would get worse, or that her song wouldn't be enough to make the sky clear again. But one day, as the clouds gathered for yet another storm, Elena heard a quiet voice from an elder perched nearby. "Elena," the elder bird said, her feathers sleek and shining despite the wind, "why don't you sing today? Give it a try." Elena hesitated, her eyes glancing at the darkening skies above her. What if my song doesn't stop the storm? What if it's not good enough? What if I get it wrong? The elder bird smiled gently. "My dear, hope isn't about perfection. It's about singing anyways. When we sing, we share a little light, a little joy, a little hope, and sometimes that's what we need." Elena looked at the elder bird, unsure, but the storm had already begun to blow, the wind rustling the trees and the rain beginning to fall in heavy sheets. Something inside her stirred. She thought of all the times she had felt the warmth of the other birds singing and their song, and how that filled her with hope. So taking a deep breath, Elena opened her beak and began to sing. At first, it was a soft chirp. But as the wind howled, her song grew stronger. It wasn't perfect, It wasn't that loud. It wasn't flawless. It was simply a song carried by the wind that was full of hope. With every note, Elena felt a warmth spread through her, not just inside, but into the world around her. And as she sang, something magical happened. The other birds began to sing with her. One by one, their voices joined hers, each offering their own imperfect but hopeful tune. The storm raged on, but it didn't seem as scary as anymore. The sound of their collective song filled the space. For a moment, the storm didn't feel so lonely. When the rain finally stopped, the clouds parted to reveal the first light of a setting sun. Elena sat quietly, her wings still fluttering with joy. She hadn't stopped the storm, but her song had brought warmth and peace to her heart and those who heard it. And so every time the storm clouds gathered, Elena sang. Her song wasn't perfect, but it was also hopeful, filled with joy, and always there to share with others, who in turn sang their own songs of hope. This story was inspired by my favorite poem by my favorite writer. Hope is the Thing with Feathers by Emily Dickinson, and I'm going to read it. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words and never stops at all. And sweetest in the gale is heard, and sore must be the storm that could have bashed the little bird that kept so many warm. I've heard it in the chillest land and on the strangest sea, yet never in extremity it asked a crumb of me. Now let us sing our children to class.
Hi, my name is Taylor Nichols, and I am a member of the senior youth group at this church. A couple of weeks ago, the senior youth group took a trip to Eastie Farms. Eastie Farms is a place in East Boston which works to grow food for the surrounding community. Members of this community are able to learn about gardening, rainwater conservation, waste management, and ways to improve the environment. The first thing that we did on our visit was meet Kanan, who runs this organization. After introducing ourselves, we learned a little bit more about Eastie Farms. We learned that this land used to be an old junkyard before transforming into Eastie Farms. We also learned that Eastie Farms uses geothermal energy to heat the greenhouse, which means that heat and water is piped through the ground and blown into the greenhouse. They did this because clean energy is one of their goals, and they try to use as little energy as possible. On top of this, we also learned that it was originally only outdoors during the summer, but members of the youth wanted to stay active, so they built a greenhouse which would allow them to work during the winter. The goal of this organization is to grow and provide food to the community of East Boston. Part of our plan was to help in the garden. However, Kanan wanted to show us around the community that we would be helping out first. So he led us on a walk on the Mary Ellen Welch East Boston Greenway, and we saw a lot of street art and murals on our way, which were painted in the city. During the middle of our walk, we stopped by a local store and got at a restaurant and got food, and we ate that near the bay. And then after we were done, we walked back to Eastie Farms. It was very inspiring to see how they were able to turn this former junkyard into a big garden. And before going to Eastie Farms, I had always assumed that gardening took place outside of the city, but it was great to see a garden like this flourish in the middle of a big city. After learning so much about this farm, I'm very excited to go back with the youth group and continue helping out in the garden. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Corinne Dowd from the Environmental Justice Committee. The following is a quote from the UUA website on ethical eating, food, and environmental justice. Ethical eating recognizes the moral consequences of our food choices. The ways our societies raise, buy, and consume our food has direct effect on the earth, plants, and animals, and humans who work to make our food available, end quote. Did you know that in 2011, Unitarian Universalists across the country committed to engage with eating as an ethical issue? And they actually adopted a statement of conscience. And you can find that statement on the UUA website, along with a wealth of related information and calls to action. This year, the First Parish Environmental Justice Committee, EJC, has launched a church-wide learning journey with opportunities to explore ethical eating and living our values. In October, EJC coordinated a potluck to discuss eating with intention and living our values. This event was well attended. The vegetarian dishes were delicious. And there was a lively discussion on food waste, organic and locally sourced foods, as well as juggling vegetarian, vegan meat balance. EJC is planning another potluck this winter, so stay tuned. Earlier this fall, it was fascinating to hear folks from Eastie Farm, as you just heard, an urban farm in East Boston that fosters food security, regenerative land use, and environmental stewardship, tell their story from this pulpit for one of our Share the Plate offerings. But how cool was it to later have a First Parish group of youth and adults tour Eastie Farm to learn about local sustainable farming and community building? And I love how passionate our senior youth are to not only learn about urban farming, but to want to get involved. I'm just going to briefly share a few of my reflections because I was on that trip to Eastie Farm as well. When we arrived at the greenhouse on November 3rd, Conan, who as you heard is the director of Eastie Farm, explained how Eastie Farm came to be. You heard about how it was a junkyard, and this started back in 2015 when several East Boston neighbors noticed this empty and overgrown plot on Sumner Street. This is really close to the Callahan Tunnel near Logan Airport, and decided to start a community farm. More neighbors and businesses got involved. They got a permit from the city, and they transformed that space. And as you heard, instead of using fossil fuels to heat the greenhouse, they installed geothermal as a clean energy source. But what I found interesting was that one of their big challenges was getting the drilling truck to the site, because they couldn't fit through the truck through the only access, which was this thin alleyway. And at first, some of the drilling parts said, no, we can't do that. But what they ended up doing was taking the mirrors off the truck so that the trucks could squeeze through the thin alleyway to do the drilling. As you heard from Taylor, they then took us on a neighborhood walking tour to show us places of cultural, social, and environmental and ecological interest. And Conan told us about how the trail would flood at times and the climate impact and such. But what I loved is how the youth were excited to plan a future visit to Eastie Farm to do hands-on volunteer work and to possibly identify a project that the urban and suburban youth could work on together. It is powerful when our youth make meaningful connections, and engage in sustainable climate actions. It gives me hope for our future. As we search for truth, meaning, and spiritual wholeness, let's consider how our relationship with food, our choices, and the broad implications for our planet and society as we seek compassion, health, and sustainability in the production of the food that we raise or purchase.
Good morning. I'm Liz Connors, a member of the lay pastoral care team, and this is the time in our service when you are invited to light a candle of joy or concern. After we hear from those in the service here in person, we will turn our attention to Zoom, and those of you on Zoom are invited to share as well. I will be lighting a candle, a silent candle, for the joys and concerns we keep in our heart, and I will be at the candle stand at the end of the service if someone wants to light a candle in private. Please keep your comments as brief as reasonably possible, and thank you. Do we have anyone on Zoom this morning? Okay, the indication is no, so I'm going to light this last candle for the joys and concerns that we are holding in our hearts. And I'll be at the candle stand after the service if one wants to light a candle in private.
We're going to sing together, and this is a song we have sung together before, but it is not in a hymnal. And we've sung it in services. We also sang it together at Jamie's installation. And I'm going to say the words once, and then we'll sing it 3 times through together. So if it's unfamiliar at first, you'll catch on as we go. We shall be known by the company we keep, by the ones who circle round to tend these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change, alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time to lead ourselves into the well. It is time now, and what a time to be alive. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. In this great turning, we shall learn to lead in love. We shall be known by the company, by the ones who circle round as these fires. We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap seeds, change alive from deep within. It is time now. It is time now that we round. It is time to lead ourselves. Thank you, Steve, for always having our back, whatever we are singing. On the first Sundays of the month, we share our morning offering with an organization selected by our Social Responsibility Council. And this morning, I invite up Ellen Shiner to tell us about our Share the Plate recipient. Ellen is a member of our newly formed Immigration Justice team.
Good morning. As you may or may not be aware, there's an urgent need for housing of new immigrant families here in Massachusetts. Under a recent statute, the Healy administration has placed a cap on the number of new immigrant families with children or pregnant women who can receive state-funded temporary emergency housing. Any such new immigrants who arrive after this cap is reached are left homeless indefinitely until a host family or church is willing to provide short-term emergency housing, another immigrant family finds more permanent housing, thereby freeing space in a temporary respite center, or the family can secure funds to pay for a hotel room. Much like in the nativity story, these new immigrant families find themselves with no room at the inn. The nonprofit group Bijan, Boston Immigration Justice and Accompaniment Network, is struggling to respond to this crisis and has been paying for 1 to 2 nights of stopgap emergency hotel stays and associated essential support for families in this situation. However, Bijan resources are extremely limited, raising the risk that more of these families will end up sleeping on the street. Bijan has now established a special emergency hotel fund to address this urgent need. And just for clarification, First Parish has its own Immigration Emergency Housing Support and Action Fund. This fund supports immigrants already in temporary shelter at the parsonage or in homes of other parishioners, and it previously helped immigrants housed at the Bedford Plaza Hotel. But in contrast, Bijan's new hotel fund covers the cost of emergency, short-term hotel stays for the most vulnerable immigrants who would otherwise be homeless. The Immigration Justice team requests your generous support of Bijan's hotel fund so we can ensure the most vulnerable immigrant families have at least temporary shelter. This is one way where each of us can put our core UU values into direct action right here in Massachusetts. Thank you for your consideration. Members of the Immigration Justice team would be happy to answer any questions you may have after the service.
Our reading this morning is excerpt from the book Let This Radicalize You by Kelly Hayes and Miriam Kaba. In 2018, Haley Quesada was on a Lake Michigan beach near her home in the neighborhood of Rogers Park in Chicago when she and others spotted two teenage girls who were drowning. The girls had fallen off a pier into an area known among lifeguards as a danger zone due to a particularly dangerous current. Quesada and her family were among those who helped one of the girls out of the water, but the other girl was pulled under by the current. 6 people entered the water in a desperate effort to recover the teen, but the waves were so violent that each of the would-be rescuers wound up in need of rescue. Quesada says 30 minutes passed between the onset of the emergency and the arrival of firefighters. During those 30 minutes, Quesada's husband and others who realized the water was too dangerous to enter searched for anything in the area that might float, that they might throw to people who were fighting a washing machine-like current and struggling to keep their heads above water. 200 community members gathered to mourn 13-year-old Darahan Torres. To Quesada, the solution was clear. Emergency flotation devices were needed on that beach. There had been no shortage of brave people eager to help each other, but they lacked the necessary tools, and some had nearly lost their lives attempting to help. Quesada and other activists started Chicago Alliance for Waterfront Safety, CAWS, a movement to educate Chicagoans on beach safety. CAWS pushed for better signage, indicating which areas were dangerous for swimmers, and the installation of safety devices. The aldermen launched a task force to address the issue, but a year went by, and as Quesada says, the work of the task force never left paper. Then in September 2021, 19-year-old Miguel Mickey Cisneros drowned on the same beach, only blocks away from where one of the teenage girls had been lost. Cisneros was within feet of the pier, and witnesses felt sure they could have saved him if only they had access to a life ring. The teen's death was the last straw for Quesada and her friends, who were tired of tangling with bureaucracy. They ordered a life ring online and installed it at the pier themselves. As expected, the Park District removed the unauthorized rescue device, and local media captured the removal on film. Other community members joined the effort and replaced the life ring, which the Parks Department removed again. 4 days in a row, the rings were replaced and removed and replaced again. Public pressure grew, and finally, the city yielded, installing its own life ring on the pier. Quesada and other local activists who also worked to help pass legislation that made the change a matter of law. Quesada stresses that it was the power of direct action that made these victories possible. She said people in power had the solutions and the funding to enact the solutions, but they also had what Quesada describes as a competing need to be the authority. These officials deeply resisted being told by the community or even their own experts what needed to be done. The city government was unwilling to prioritize human lives, so Quesada and others had to place human life ahead of the rules.
The title of the book that our reading came from, Let This Radicalize You, is the first part of a famous quote by Miriam Kaba. The full quote is, "Let this radicalize you rather than lead you to despair." This being any new unthinkable injustice, this being any old injustice that you are experiencing anew or just learning about, this being people or institutions that you have trusted but that have let you down. Let this radicalize you. Kaba is not only known for her quote about radicalizing, but also for the quote in the order of service, "Hope is a discipline," a phrase she credits to a nun she met. She is someone many people are turning to in this particular moment, a moment in which we may need some disciplined hope and alternatives to despair. The idea of radicalization can get a bad reputation as a process that turns people into extremists. Extremism, many understandably feel, is how we got our country into such a mess. Radicalized people, we may imagine, are judgy and inflexible, always telling you how you fall short, willing to use any necessary means to meet their ends, even violence. And this can be true, and this does not have to be true. The root, no pun intended, of the word radical is, well, root. To radicalize is to get to the root of things. And at the root of many harmful things in our society are death-dealing systems that prioritize things like liability over lives, profits over people. And spiritually, one of the best ways we can let ourselves be radicalized and practice hope in this moment is to refuse the death-dealing systems whenever possible, and instead choose life. And this can be complicated, because the death-dealing systems are everywhere and in everything. It's pretty impossible to avoid unless we go and live off the grid on an organic farm commune somewhere, which is not the route I would suggest we all take. And the part where it is impossible to avoid the death-dealing systems can be very demoralizing. But the upside of this fact is that we simply cannot do it perfectly, and so nobody can get an A+ in ethical living. Whether it's ethical eating, ethical travel, ethical clothes wearing, you name it, we can't do it perfectly. I will say I have sometimes gotten stuck in the perfectionism trap around trying to avoid unethical behavior in these deeply unethical systems. Years ago, as the company Amazon was growing, and so was my hatred for Jeff Bezos, I decided that I would boycott Amazon. And I wouldn't buy anything from that platform no matter what. But then it was a secret Santa in my then husband's side of the family for Christmas, and I drew my spouse's stepdad, and he really wanted this very specific item that could not be found anywhere but Amazon. So I decided that these were extreme circumstances, a familial daughter-in-law obligation, and I would buy the thing. The problem is, because I had been sort of in a self-righteous purity place around my little personal boycott, the little crack started to make the whole thing crumble. And pretty soon I was finding a lot of exceptions to why I just needed to use Amazon. The most notable being that if you pay them enough money, they will ship you things very fast. And I am always waiting until it is almost too late to buy most things. Similarly, I was mostly vegetarian for a large number of years, and then that fell away permanently when I temporarily started eating meat during my pregnancy. Yes, Moira is now 9, so you can see how long ago that was. But recently something happened that kind of helped bring me out of my screw it all, no ethical consumption under capitalism vibe. Somebody was posting on social media about how there was this alternative to the website Goodreads, which is like social media about books. Some of you may be familiar with that. And I didn't know this, but apparently Goodreads is owned by Amazon. Everything is owned by everything, you know? But the person posting was noting that there is an alternative to Goodreads called Storygraph that was founded by a Black woman in 2019. And you can actually export your Goodreads data and import it into Storygraph, so you don't even have to lose any of your lists of books, which was important to me. And so I thought, okay, I'll give it a try. And turns out it's a delight. I highly recommend it. Not just because it's a more ethical alternative, but because they have cool graphs, as the name implies. And also because they have tags for the mood of a book and also for the pacing of a book. Turns out I like medium-paced books that have an emotional mood. And evangelizing this new alternative gave me great joy, because I wasn't doing it out of some kind of judgy or self-righteous place of like, everything's so bad. I was doing it out of a place of feeling really excited about this alternative. Sort of like how my household gets a farm share of local organic vegetables from Farmer Chris, who is a really nice guy with very good vegetables. And we also get a local meat share. We are not a vegetarian household, and we buy plenty of things that are not organic and not local. But when we have the opportunity, we joyfully choose life-giving food that does much less harm to the earth and to the climate, as it nourishes our bodies. And I believe that is the most sustainable and hopeful way to be radical. To move out of shouting, "But this other thing is bad," and to move toward life in a disciplined way, which can look like a lot of different things. It can look like starting a farm in an abandoned lot in East Boston, or a very similar project I read about in a book of essays called Inciting Joy by Ross Gay. He writes about creating a free fruit for all orchard in Bloomington, Indiana. He tells of showing up at a town meeting knowing nothing about orchards and ending up on the board of the new organization. Maybe some of you have had similar experiences of leadership. He writes, in what might be the most impressive run-on sentence I've encountered, "But the inefficiency, the incompetence, the ineffectiveness, the dismal rate of production, the off-taskness, the wandering, the flabbiness, the consensusing, the play, the listening, the dreaming, were all just ways of being together. It was hanging out. It was growing closer. It was mycelial. Its product was itself. Its product was connection, friendship. It was care. It was, I'm making jam on Saturday if anybody wants to join me, or let me help with hauling the limestone. It was, you can leave your kids with us as long as you need. It was, take my car. It was, whatever you need, if I got it, you got it. That was the product, which is to say the product was our needs offered to each other, held to each other, held by each other. This sentence/paragraph reminds me a lot of our beloved Anno list, which for any who aren't aware is a church email list for announcements. But often those announcements are, I need a ride to the doctor, or I have extra tomatoes from my garden, or can anyone recommend a podiatrist, or I'm giving away a good quality child's bed, which is how Moira just got a lovely new bed and nightstand. Thank you to the Martin family. That sentence paragraph by Ross Gay also reminded me a lot of the Boston Immigration Justice Accompaniment Network, an organization I unintentionally helped found in 2017, with zero expertise in forming organizations or in immigration law. We were all just figuring out how to support some of the most vulnerable, undocumented people after Donald Trump being shockingly elected president. We were just stumbling about, following the lead of organizers inside and outside of immigration jail, with our good intentions and many mistakes, our vast communal resources, and the remarkable trust placed in us, despite our lack of knowledge or credentials. We did our best to build the relationships we needed, with people inside immigration jail and with their loved ones, with donors and with immigration lawyers. We refused to abandon anyone or vet anyone to see if they deserved freedom or care. We created the systems we needed while using them. And as Let This Radicalize You confirms, that is how a lot of community organizing works. You start with care. You start with relationships. You start with choosing life. Because being radical is not only seeing the root of the problem, it is imagining the world that we really want and living into it, no matter the circumstances. It is imagining communities where we have the tools to save each other, and then putting these tools up ourselves if our governments refuse. It is imagining communities where nobody gets put into jail because of their immigration status, and then raising the money to free people with bond and supporting those we cannot free yet. It is imagining communities where everyone is housed and then offering shelter when there are people who do not have housing. It is imagining a world where food is local and sustainable and affordable, and then growing it ourselves in the midst of a city. Here's another quote from Let This Radicalize You. In a 2017 piece written in the wake of Hurricane Harvey, climate writer Dar Jamal used texts from his loved ones who lived in the Houston area to frame his reporting on how anthropogenic climate disruption had intensified the storm. Jamal ended the piece with a text from a friend who lived near downtown Houston. The text read, "It will take years to recover. We are all rescuing each other. Odd to think that our future can be summed up like that. It will take years to recover. We are all rescuing each other. Because that is the world that we want to inhabit. One where we care so deeply that we save each other from disaster. And we are rescuing each other with community gardens and rides to the doctor, with phone calls to check in on one another and how we are doing, with casseroles when we're having a crisis, and with rides to the Immigration Customs Enforcement Office in nearby Burlington, with the mass mobilization of resources to care for migrants in our community. We are all rescuing each other. And that is how we will survive all of the catastrophes. The personal health catastrophes and the family catastrophes, the climate catastrophe, the political catastrophes. We will not be pure or perfect. We will not get it just right. We will not fuel ourselves with self-righteousness and fear. We will metabolize and express our grief and our rage, and let the underlying love lead us to choose life in every big and small way. And it will not be easy, because despair and overwhelm and checking out and freaking out are all very understandable reactions to the death-dealing systems of this world and to the many personal challenges that we are all facing. So we will be disciplined in practicing hope. And when we slip into cynicism or anxiety, we will forgive ourselves, because that is part of the discipline. But we will not stop there. We will think of Quesada and her community installing life rings against city orders. We will think of people turning abandoned lots into farms. We will think of people surviving hurricanes and setting out to rescue their neighbors. We will think of the last time someone generally helped us or received our help. And then we will continue the practice of choosing life. Please join in our closing hymn. It is in your cloth-bound hymnal, and I don't know what number it is. 6. It's number 6. Yet let our yes to life be louder than our despair. Let our candles of hope stay lit, and when they go out, find someone else whose is still burning and pass the light and get it from them. We have what we need to rescue one another.